good afternoon, everybody. As we were just introduced, my name is Jerome Morrison.
I'm Lauren Cason.
And we're excited to talk to you all about today. About our debate that we have had over the years as we have designed XR projects together.
Yeah. And
some of the different approaches that we've had and the kinds of just overviews of what that conversation has been over the last few years.
Yeah, we've had, this has been an argument that we've been having for years now, like much to the chagrin of many of our previous coworkers.
Yeah,
so we're going to do it in front of you.
Yeah, we told people that we were going to be having this debate in front of a live audience, and we got a lot of groans.
Yeah,
but it's all good.
Welcome.
Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah. So I want to talk about like minimalism first. So I think minimalism, when it's good, and when we're talking about design, not necessarily art, it's like a clear chair, right? So it provides you the scaffolding that you need. It supports you. It does the job it's supposed to do. But it's as invisible as it can be in the moment. It's not totally invisible, but ideally it's fading into the background. A lot of my work gets labeled as minimalist. This isn't. I wouldn't necessarily claim that as my design philosophy, but like I worked at Apple, I worked in the technology development group as an artist, I worked on Monument Valley 2 as a senior artist, and then a lot of my current work really focuses on utility for XR, especially in the home. So looking at things like baking and how you could remove friction from that experience while having the fewest number of sort of added rendered pixels in your visual field. And that approach, it's reductive, and what I like about that as a possibility for XR about like a minimal device would be that we could have a less disruptive device, right? Like if I have my phone, like even being like this and closing my space off, if I'm up here and my eyes are out here, if we can do that while not sort of clouding our world, I think we have a better personal device than phones. That said, and if you're playing AWE Bingo, you can cross off your Kichi slide, but I'm worried about this world. A lot of my work is in reaction to this possibility. And I think some of what's happening right now with a lot of maximalist art, because that's really popular right now in XR, is we're setting ourselves up to be really comfortable with all this stuff in our visual field with the art, and then later on, we're all going to be really comfortable with it, and then this is what we're going to end up with. Is we're going to be like, well, the art's already there, and we're fine with this, so this is just the ad version.
Yeah, the overwhelming Times Square version of the XR, of this XR metaverse world. Sorry, lost that bet already to not say the M word. But yeah,
we talked about a swear jar for the M word.
Yeah. So, but there, as Lauren has had a minimalist approach to things, I am coming from the world of Meow Wolf, and anybody who's not familiar with that, give it a Google, and you'll see how, like, within those images, that kind of maximalist approach that we have in that space. Because as I have thought about some of the origins of design thinking and of this minimalism, back when I was taking some art history classes back in my graduate school days, I remember learning about Bauhaus and how a lot of that design thinking came from that space. But it was, the Bauhaus group is a pretty homogenous group of European folks who, with their design thinking, came up with some pretty inaccessible chairs that were literally designed for Nazis.
Yeah, they did. They literally designed chairs for the SS. So.
Yeah, so, and that SS went on to have the degenerate art movement, or the degenerate art shows, where the maximalism, what I like to say, the maximalism of the human experience that you can have through jazz music and through art and through a lot of the suffering that was happening in World War II, the artwork that was coming out of that was considered degenerate, and that it needed to disappear and not be a part of the design thinking world. So I've had a problem with just being too minimal around things and not allowing more kinds of ideas to be able to come into the space that is more accessible to more people.
Yeah, so I totally agree. This is one of the reasons I don't actually like the label of like design thinking or minimalism. It is a way of approaching design, and I think the biggest problem is when we say it is the way of approaching design. If you want to move. Yeah, so I think we've done this with 2D UI and UX. Like this happened. We act like there is a correct way of doing 2D UI. It's pretty minimal. It's kind of flat. Like we had neumorphism for a while, but like it's all pretty homogenous. And I have hope that we're not going to do this with XR and with 3D UI and UX, and that there's the possibility to do better. That said, I don't think maximalism is the answer to minimalism's problems. Like, maximalism also comes from some pretty problematic spaces, at least the aesthetic does, right? So like, it comes from the cabinets of curiosity, and like settlers going or colonists like taking objects from their travels, putting that all together based on their experience of design and of the world, and saying, I like the way this stuff looks together, I like these colors next to each other, but not thinking about, what culture does this come from, what design language does this come from, just, about their experience of that stuff.
So as Lauren has said a lot of those things to me, and again, throughout this debate, the book that came to mind for me was Daniel Quinn's Ishmael. If any of you all are not familiar with that, definitely give this either a read or a listen. It's a pretty short read or short listen in about 4 or 5 hours. This concept of takers versus leavers. And so it's this thought that I've had of, we are the best, so we deserve to take and use all of it and put everything that we want to out there. And it's felt kind of strange, sort of approach that I've also started to become a little bit uncomfortable with. But I like to think about still the possibilities of maximalism, though. Like, this is Playa, this is Burning Man, but it's not quite Burning Man. This is alt space VR. And so, but I like this image because it's showing the possibilities of XR, of the kind of VR space that we can have, but also what happens out in real world in Burning Man is this maximalist space where there is so much gender expression and creative expression that people are able to have, and all of this humanity that's able to exist for a short time within this city, and all of these different ways of being. This maximum approach to the human experience has been something that, that also went on to inspire places like Meow Wolf, which is where I work. This is a slide from one of those spots that is this maximalist sort of ideal. So I think that when it's handled with intent, this maximalist art can be more egalitarian. It's accessible to everyone, and it's for everyone to be able to have a hand in its craft. That's one thing that you get to see and love a whole lot within Meow Wolf, of seeing all of the fingerprints and all of the different ideas, and a lot of yes-anding that does happen, but can be problematic as well. And it's also a perspective that everybody can identify with, or at least there's something. I like that the kind of art that has some space for everybody to be able to approach it from whatever may be whatever their interest may be. I think that's one of the things that's made Meow Wolf very successful. Mm-hmm. But also, the GIF didn't work.
The GIF. Wait, click, maybe it'll go.
Maybe it'll go. No, it's not going to go. Well, if you want to see what I'm talking about, go to cameronsworld.net. So, because I believe that the older internet was a maximalist space. It had a whole lot of just GIFs and artwork and just all of this creative expression that was happening back in the early 90s when people were first starting to get onto the internet, but before everything was A/B tested to hell and to the last hex decimal of the color blue that we get to see all of the time.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I want to live in GeoCities, and like GeoCities, the first website I ever made. It was Lauren's unicorn website. It was just a scrolling website of unicorn gifs. Best work I ever did. But like, GeoCities is great. But I don't think, go back. Can you go? Yeah, great. I don't think that what we're debating here is minimalism versus maximalism. I think what we're looking at here is folk art versus product design, right? Because GeoCities was people making, like, individuals creating things, or like a small group of individuals. Whereas what you're looking at on the right there is something created by a large team over years, and like you said, it was A/B tested within an inch of its life. So yeah, I want to live in the left side of the world, but it doesn't matter whether or not the aesthetic is minimal or maximal. What matters is like, who is the person, or who are the people who get to drive culture and design and aesthetic? Is it individuals or is it companies?
Well, but then I start to think, though, that has grand art ever been made outside of the context of a company? Looking at even chapels, the Great Pyramids, artwork. I mean, any kind of artwork that was being made, somebody had to make the paintbrush, somebody has to make the paint, somebody's out there making the canvases and gathering the wood. There's always some other company, some corporation. I mean, I would think that even in the days of cave paintings, there were probably somebody that was controlling the blood and fats that you were getting from the animals in order to be able to, supply folks with this. So it's kind of a losing game. There's like this minimalism, maximalism. When we're trying to do things at the scale that we want to be working at, you kind of can't escape the corporatists' issues.
Yeah, and I was having this conversation with a friend the other day where I was like, it's a hard thing to make art in AR because, I'm working with a Samsung phone on the App Store, which is owned by Android, and then it's on Snapchat, and it's all within all these different ecosystems that you have to consider. And she was like, yeah, but she's a poet, and she was like, Lauren, but I'm Norteño and I write in English. That's a platform and that's got problems. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. Yeah, even writing a poem, you're dealing within these structures of power. And if you're trying to find the pure form of creation, you're probably not going to be able to find it. You can't live outside of this.
So where we eventually wound up together was that neither of these concepts are going to save us. Minimalism, maximalism, we're both wrong.
Yeah.
We're really just arguing about aesthetics here so far.
So far.
So what's actually important? We're really getting to what we actually want to talk to you all about today. And so forget minimalism and maximalism, and instead think about what are the things that we want to maximize within our experience designs and what are the things that we want to minimize within our experience design. So we distilled that down into a nice alliterative list that we put together of community, culture, and curation. And these are questions right now. What do we want to minimize and maximize? And attention, access, and accessibility. So starting with community, there's a really great YouTube video out there right now by the YouTube channel called People Make Games. I think this came out about 2 weeks ago or so. Really, it's a good long, it's about an hour-long watch, but it's really great. The video is about the metaverse that we already have in spaces like VR chat. And what I loved about that, this video was talking about when it comes to this version of the metaverse is how much, again, gender expression and creative expression and all of this art and ideas that people are able to just pile into this space. I mean, I think that's why I used the GeoCities slide earlier. In this video, he talks about how we are in the GeoCities era of the metaverse when you look at VR chat, of just how there's just everything is just going on there. And so I believe that when it comes to the kinds of communities that we can create online, let's be sure to maximize those kinds of communities. Make things that are open to all. But there's no moderation. If you give community access to everybody, but we need to keep out the Nazis, y'all. We need to keep the bad people off of these spaces, or at least help to move them into other ways of thinking. And so community, yes, maximize it, but not quite, because not all communities.
Hit the thing. Put that Gamergate. Yeah, this is the era that I came up in when I was a game developer. Was Gamergate. That was where I cut my teeth. And so community good, but community not also always good. Sometimes community not very healthy or pretty toxic. And that comes to figuring out if we're gonna have the metaverse as as a whole thing that we're all in, it's one space. Curation, moderation, culture. How are we going to balance these three things? Who gets to moderate? Who has the responsibility to moderate? Who gets to curate? Who has the responsibility to curate? And both of those things are going to be a part of driving culture. And we haven't figured out the answer to this question yet. This is a really hard question. Do we want to live in the Apple world where it's highly curated, but it's curated by a company and they have their own motivations? Do we want to live in the Android world where it's much less curated? Do we want to live in Reddit where it's community curated? That's not without problems. Do you want to live in the dark web? I don't know. We don't have an answer to this yet, but I think it's going to be one of the most important questions that we answer. What do we want to maximize and minimize within this, within the sort of trifecta within, the one metaverse?
So moving to another side of things, thinking about the amount of attention that these platforms are requiring from us, and how much access do these platforms have on us. We both agreed that we went pretty hard into this dystopian
hard on the dystopia here. Sorry,
sorry, yeah, not sorry. But because I think we recognize a lot of these images. This is the kind of scary future that, when you think about the dark side of XR, the dark side of these futures, this is what we start to get into. But one of the problems that I have with these kinds of this sort of imaginary futurism is that even these too are dystopian spaces that are, and a lot of the dystopian novels that have been been written before have also been mostly white folks or like not really big, oh, I just lost the word. They haven't been big umbrella communities. They have not, I love thinking about like imaginary futurisms and like black futurisms and what are the positive ways that we can have some of these spaces. But that being said, where we are right now, the amount of attention and access that some of these platforms have to us is pretty scary. That's your biggest fear.
So access is the thing that I talk about a lot. So like, there's access to each other within any sort of community, right? So do I, player one, have access to you, player two? Do you have access to me?
As individuals.
As individuals, but then there's also, do the platforms have access to me? Do I have access to the platforms? And we'll talk more about, do I have access to the platforms in a second, but I want to talk about platforms having access to me. I feel like gaze tracking is the thing that we're all talking about at AWE this year. That's like the big thing. But there's also like, are we going to be doing BCI, sweat, heart rate, breathing, all those things. And if we are saying we want these to be the devices of the future, we're going to throw away our phones in 20 years and we're going to have these glasses and they have all these sensors, right? And if I want to live in the modern world, I need to have my phone. Like it's really hard to exist without that. And I was having a conversation with a friend the other day who used a period tracker, and she's really scared right now that she has tracked all that information. And if we have all these sensors, what kind of stuff are you going to know about my body? And what does that mean about my bodily autonomy in the future and other people's bodily autonomy? That said, I could go down so many rabbit holes about these sorts of like scary futures.
And she has.
And I have. I do it all the
She
time.
has. It's been long conversations.
Yeah. That said, all this stuff is so cool, right? Like it's really cool. I want to do something with BCI. Like I want to do something with gaze tracking. Like it's cool. It's stuff that's on the palette. It's not inherently bad, these technologies, but it's also not neutral. It's not neutral to create things with them. And you have to consider, what are you doing by putting that out there in the world? So I don't know. I don't know if we min or max this. I think we have to figure out how do we make sure that we don't build these worlds, right? These scary ones on the screen.
But that being said, the sort of world that I do want to have is one where we maximize accessibility. I don't have it on the slide up here, but another YouTube channel that I will recommend to you all, or YouTube video, there's a guy who does the year in accessibility advancements in video games that he does every year at the end of the year. That's talking about what are the new kinds of features that people are putting in video games and all sorts of interactive spaces. And the thing that I love about accessibility is that if you build it for the people who need it, the people who don't need it will wind up also using it because it's just always an enhancement. This is like the issue of accessibility is something that we've also tried to, or at least we've talked a lot about at Meow Wolf, and we're trying to find some ways to improve that because we've got spaces that can be very auditory and visually overwhelming. We even have, in our Santa Fe exhibit, a lot of the space is not wheelchair accessible, so we've tried to fix that as we've looked at into our future exhibits. But yeah, when it comes to just having accessibility, even if you think it's just a small percentage of people who may use that feature or who absolutely need that feature, more people are going to be able to use it. And it also gives access to people that may not be on that platform otherwise. That could be just wonderful, beautiful creators that you're going to get some interesting stuff off of if you are able to maximize the accessibility to the platform. But it's not just that, because we live in New Mexico.
Yeah, gosh, like the internet access, right? Like that's a big thing. Like, do I have access to the internet if I live in a rural community? Do I have access to the platform? Do I have access to the hardware? Like all of those things are really too important to consider as we're building this world out.
Because something that bothered me on the first day, I think right after the keynote, somebody said that we're going to be getting rid of all of the screens eventually and that it will be glasses. And that felt strange to me because of this digital divide. There are a lot of people, like we say, who don't have computers, especially out in New Mexico and rural areas. They do not have computers. They do not have internet access. And so how can we make sure that these platforms, that this hardware is able to go out to the most remote areas, or at least we're able to get those people onto some of these platforms and realizing and helping them to learn the possibilities that are out there. They cannot be left behind because there's a lot of brilliance that's out there in those folks' experiences. So as we said halfway through this, aesthetics don't matter. How you reach those aesthetics matter. And we believe that if you look at these 6 points here of community, culture, and curation, attention, access, and accessibility, you will arrive at what your aesthetic should be if you don't try and start from
Yeah,
this.
it doesn't matter whether somebody points at my work and they say, oh, it's clearly minimalist, or they point at Jerome's work and they say, it's clearly maximalist. What matters is, like, how did you get there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. We do have some time for questions. We've got 5 minutes on this clock if there's anybody who has one out there. And if not, yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for this amazing talk, y'all.
And yeah, and your name?
Francis.
Hi, Francis.
Hi. So, I guess one feature are we seeing like a sliding scale where we're just gonna choose the parameters of the minimalist and maximalism? Like, is that one feature that we could look to? Because I guess it's sort of like how Apple asks about, oh, can I send my data to this company? But instead of that, it's like, okay, I can curate how much art that's popping up, or I can control how minimalist and maximalist this particular world or scene.
Yeah, we actually drew a chart where we sort of had, there is the sliding scale, minimalist, maximalist, but then I think the error that we create and saying, oh, it's either minimalism or maximalism, is there's this whole actual spectrum, right? It's much larger than either of those aesthetics, and that it's not a scale. It's sort of much more all over the place.
But I think I do hear what you're saying, though, about giving that option to the user to be able to turn on and off however many features that they want or how much visuals they want. It's another thing that I did like about VR chat, and he talks about in that video, of a lot of those features and things that you can turn off if you're having a bad time with however it is that your experience is happening. You do have that amount of control and can change how much access that space has to you. Because I mean, some people want to have all of the Google Homes in their home, and some people are very tech averse to that. And all of those experiences are okay. So I do think that we should have the ability for people to adjust their experience, because there is no average.
Right. Because some people, like for example, Amazon Alexa, they might like giving Amazon that state because they're like, yo, maybe it give me better results when I search on Amazon for shopping. But that's a personal choice. Some people don't want it. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
So I just bring it up. So thank you so much. I
Valid
appreciate
experience. Yeah. Any other questions?
Cool.
Well, all right.
Great.
Thank y'all
Thanks,
very much. Enjoy the rest of your AWE.
Yeah.